It's the 1215th day of the war. The US has struck Iran in the form we expected. The B-2 Spirit bombers have dropped the JBU-57. They are the most powerful non-nuclear charges in the world on the Ford nuclear facility. The Tomahawks have also come to 2 more nuclear facilities in Tehran. Trump has turned to the nation and said that the targets are completely destroyed and Iran should capitulate if it doesn't want further strikes. Trump is getting closer to its first term and ceases to listen to the idiots he has hired for high positions. This is a good sign. Let's hope that the US is watching Putin closely, who has become accustomed to the fact that Trump's threats end in nothing in half a year. That 2 weeks is an endless period. But the US president showed that he is not a prisoner, so 2 weeks have an end. Russian soldiers and military corps complain that after the appointment of Madyar as the head of the forces of unmanned systems, Ukraine began to actively and purposefully knock out Russian drone operators. And the military is the most powerful. The KZ requires that Russia does the same because the drone operators in this war are the most important resource at the moment. Russian offensive will not lead to the breakthrough of the front, they believe in the Estonian intelligence. According to them, Ukraine is successfully defending itself without allowing Russia to achieve any significant success. In principle, this is what we see on the front all 2 months, but suddenly you, the Estonian intelligence, trust more than your eyes. In the last week, it was characterized by the relative stabilization in the Sumy region. Russia has not stopped there yet, but is significantly slowed down. The Ukrainian Defense Forces counterattack and also capture Russian soldiers in packs. This is how pictures of the capture of 12 fighters of the Russian Federation appeared. Vladimir Zelensky answered Putin. The president of Ukraine rightly notes that the Russian dictator values reality inadequately. But what is important, regardless of the motives, Putin directly says that the goal of Russia is to capture and kill. And this must be taken seriously, says Zelensky, including the allies of Kiev, who must finally decide. Lukashenko met with the special envoy of Trump, Keith Kellogg, whom Russia called too pro-Ukrainian. They talked for 6.5 hours, and then it became known that Lukashenko let go of opposition leader Sergei Tikhanovsky, who actually scaled the opposition movement in the country in 2020, which led to the situation when the Führer was on the verge. In addition to Tikhanovsky, 13 more political prisoners were released. Well, as a bonus, Putin received a new paranoia on the subject of what Lukashenko was mutating there again. About this and much more in today's fresh summary, which you can support with your likes, comments, and subscriptions to the channel. Especially your subscriptions are important. Based on them, the YouTube algorithm gives out this video to a large number of people. Well, if the subscriptions, respectively after viewing or during viewing, become larger, you can also support the video, and in general, this channel is financial. You can do this on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. And by buying NVPN, this is a means to bypass blocking, which allows you to bypass blocking. Actually watch YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, go to blocked media. The state should not decide for you what to watch, listen, and read. This should be done by you. NVPN helps you in this. Therefore, buy it by the link in the description. It is legal in Russia to not ban the use and purchase of VPNs. Well, by buying NVPN, you support this channel. And we move on to what happened in the past day. Well, after all, Trump stopped doing beep and gave an order to strike Iranian nuclear objects. All 3 were attacked, including the object under the mountains of Ford. B-2 Spirit bombers with JBU-57 bomb bunkers were used to attack it. These are unique shells that create the most powerful non-nuclear explosion. According to the United States, 6 such bombs were used. Also, 2 other objects were attacked, but already classic Tomahawks. The total number of launched missiles is estimated at 30 pieces. Trump also bombed off social networks, of course, writing a few messages. The first thing he wrote was, "We have completed our extremely successful attack on 3 nuclear facilities in Iran, including Ford, Natanz, and Iskin. All planes are now in the airspace of Iran. A complete set of bombs has been dropped on the main target of the Ford facility. All planes are safely returning home. Congratulations to our great American soldiers in the world. There is no other army that could do this now. The time of peace has come. Thank you for your attention to this question." Next, he wrote, "I will address the nation at 22 in the White House with a speech about our very successful war operation in Iran. This is a historic moment for the United States of America, Israel, and the whole world. Iran must now agree to the end of this war. Thank you," he wrote. And the third tweet in his True Social, "Any act together with the country of Iran against the United States of America will be met with." Much more first than what we saw tonight. "Thank you, Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States," he wrote. Then Donald Trump appealed to the nation, and this happened at about 5 a.m. in Moscow and Kiev. Just recently, the U.S. Air Force took large-scale strike on 3 key nuclear facilities of the Iranian regime regime, the fort on Tanzhe Isfahan. Everyone has heard these names for many years, while Iran was creating this terrifying destructive enterprise. Our goal was to destroy the opportunities of Iran to enrich uranium and stop nuclear threats coming from the world's leading state-sponsored terrorism. Tonight, I can tell the world that the strikes were a great military success. The key nuclear facilities of Iran were completely destroyed. Also, Trump congratulated the Prime Minister of Israel Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli army for their well-done work. He did not call the United States of Israel a real team and later called Netanyahu. But if the world does not come quickly, Trump said, we will strike other targets with accuracy, speed, and skill. Most of them can be destroyed in a matter of minutes, Donald Trump warned. This is technically easy to do, I will add to myself. On June 13, I said one simple thing that is not oriented to the deep knowledge of Iran's specifics or anything else that experts say. The PVO of the country is destroyed. When it flies over your country and bombs you with F-15, it means there is nothing to destroy it. Therefore, the operation that Israel carried out allows Jerusalem and Washington to bomb any object on the territory of Iran without any resistance. There's no question whether Iran will be able to resist, since the answer to it was clear on June 13. The only question is how strong Iran is ready to destroy its country before capitulation. At the same time, Israel's war is not an invading Jerusalem. It does not claim to capture the territory or resources of Iran. The only thing Israel wants to achieve is that the state, the head of which declares the need to destroy Israel by 2040, does not have nuclear weapons. In fact, both the USA and Europe agree with this goal. By the way, Russia agrees with it, but only in words. Therefore, Iran either goes to deal or it continues to be rubbed into powder until it loses all its military potential. Meanwhile, Tehran continues missile strikes on the civilian objects of Israel. Since the country does not have the strength to fight with the military, they are hitting the civilian population. Main question is whether the United States has managed to destroy Ford, because despite all the calculations, everything that concerns JGU-57 was a theory. Let's see what will happen in practice. The United States is considered to have destroyed the object. It is possible to add satellite images in the near future. Of course, the ethnic groups are in mourning today. Especially funny is their comparison with the beginning of the attack on Hitler's Germany on June 22, 1941. Many of them even write that Trump did it on purpose. But I think we all know very well and understand that Trump has no idea when the attack on the USSR began, when the Second World War began, and even more so at what date the Great Patriotic War began. The criticism of Trump by some of his supporters and Democrats does not seem reasonable to me. Trump positioned himself as a peacemaker, and he is blamed for the fact that the attack is not a peacekeeping. I do not agree with this thesis. The world is through force. This is the only way to stop aggression. The Munich Agreement of 1938 did not bring peace but brought war. The most monstrous, large-scale, and catastrophic in the history of mankind. Only victory, military victory over fascist Germany brought peace, and all the efforts of Trump to act as an intermediary in the war between Russia and Ukraine led to nothing. If you are the most powerful country in the world, your task is not to be a mediator, but to act as someone who helps victims of aggression and punishes aggressors. And for the first time in its new term, Trump did this. As you remember, Obama got the world's prize after he bombed Libya, which may look, let's say, specific, but in my opinion, it makes sense. So if Trump really wants the world's prize and he whines about it a lot, then today he took a step in the right direction. A great power is a great responsibility, and this, of course, is about the USA. So today I have no complaints against Donald Trump, at least on the Middle East issue. I sincerely hope that now the war in the Middle East will end as soon as possible, saving the lives of the Israelis who are being shot by the Iran missile, and the destruction of which Iran set its goal, all its existence after the Islamic Revolution, and the lives of the citizens of Iran, who have been prisoners and in the terrorist power for many decades. In addition, I hope that we will see the pressure of the United States on Russia and the help of Ukraine. The good should be with fists, not with stories about beautiful deals in 2 weeks. By the way, I think that Vladimir Putin is very tense. We have already discussed this with you, but Trump had a big problem. He was chosen in the United States as a cool, decisive guy, but a meme taco appeared. Trump's always checking out, and it didn't just happen that way. All the initiatives that the new old president of the United States tried to implement, he turned away. And on the outside, he was very indecisive. He threatened a lot, but this did not lead to any result or action, so much so that the world just stopped perceiving him, both allies and potential enemies like Putin, although it is not clear who is an ally and who is an enemy. Because it is impossible to seriously correct a person who threatens, gives 2 weeks, and then powerfully gives 2 more weeks, and then 2 more, and so on to infinity. But now Trump has shown that sometimes he is capable of decisive action. Moreover, he is able to perform the threats and ultimatums that he puts. Therefore, when and if next time Trump publicly demands a ceasefire from Russia or something else and gives 2 weeks, telling that otherwise there will be consequences, Putin will really have to think. Let's talk in more detail about Iran in a couple of days when the dust settles, and there will be answers to the following questions. 1. Did the United States manage to destroy Iran's nuclear program? 2. Will Iran respond directly to the United States? 3. Will Iran block the Armenian Strait, an important oil transportation artery? This will affect oil prices. So far, we can only be glad that the probability of nuclear war has decreased. I consciously did not take the topic of nuclear strikes for the last week because there is too much speculation around it. But I sincerely believe that the appearance of nuclear weapons in Iran, which was certainly its goal, is a direct threat to all humanity, without joking. Such weapons are the maximum threat to religious fanatics who commit terrorist attacks and sponsor terrorists around the world. Because in the constitution of Iran there is a world Islamic revolution, and in the statements of the supreme leader of Iran, they are not just a threat, but a call for destruction of those or other states, including America and Israel. However, as Putin calls it, they are regimes and not just countries, because Iran does not recognize the existence of Israel. There is a much greater threat than such a weapon in the hands of even the KNDR or Russia, because fanatics are fanatics. And the last one, have you seen the tux and gabard of the institutional room? And I have not. There were Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, State Secretary Mark Rubio, Defense Minister Pete Hegseth, and also the head of the White House, Susan Wiles. And I really hope that Gabbard, who coordinates all intelligence services in the United States, is finalized. This is the lover of Bashar Assad and Putin. She should not be allowed to approach the White House with a gunshot and make decisions, and I hope Trump understood this. In general, we are now observing the transformation of Trump into Trump of the first term, when after Kovalevsky, with an attempt to create his own team, he eventually surrounded himself with competent professionals who, in fact, controlled the country. Not an ideal model, but better than we can expect from Donald Trump. So let's wait until they get rid of Gabbard, Hegseth, put adequate people in their place, and Mark Rubio will be the one to rule. He is not our slanero, but he used to be, and under certain conditions he can become a slanero again. But until then, the support of the Ukrainian military is also our first task with you. We continue to gather for the soldiers of the 83rd Separate Battalion, 105th Separate Brigade, a company of fire support. I remind you of their appeal to you. We, soldiers of the 83rd Separate Battalion, 105th Separate Brigade, a company of fire support, ask you to help and support in the collection of money for the purchase of a car for effective and timely performance of the assigned tasks and moving towards Kharkiv. Every car will bring us to victory, and only the mind of the force. That will give glory to Ukraine and the heroes of glory. Here is the QR code to the Monobank in the description. Link to the Monobank on PayPal.
Здесь QR-код на Монобанку в описании, ссылка на Монобанку, на PayPal, USDT TRC20, криптовалютные шейхи, добро пожаловать. Давайте поможем украинским бойцам продолжать сдерживать российскую агрессию, уничтожать фашистскую оккупационную армию и защищать Украину и украинских граждан. Все ссылки в описании. Я в сборе уже поучаствовал.
Monobank on PayPal. Vladimir Zelensky spoke with an appeal in response to Putin's speech, in which he stated his intention to conquer the whole of Ukraine. Yesterday, everyone heard a signal from the Russian leader. Whether it was about hell or madness, it can be explained as you wish. But when a murderer says he wants to kill, we perceive it as appropriate. Yesterday, Putin made a benefit in particular for the United States of America. He said absolutely frankly, yes, he wants the whole of Ukraine, and he wants not 4 years, not 14 years, but a long time. This is how he was formed by Russian imperialism. And when he talks about Ukraine and something else, about the legs of Russian soldiers, he also talks about Belarus, about the Baltic states, about Moldova, about the Caucasus, about Kazakhstan, and about all the places on earth where Russian killers can reach. Putin's power ends where the possibility of Russian killers ends. Of course, we will find Ukrainian drones on every leg of the Russian occupant. Of course, Ukraine will defend itself. We all clearly understand that the issue of the independence of Ukraine is the issue of the survival of Ukrainians. In these years, during the times of Putin, the Russians went further than Gulag and many other things that happened. They burned down the cities, burned down villages to zero. Ruins remain and not a single human life. Everyone in the world can see that Putin did it completely consciously with Donbass. In fact, Donbass is destroyed. They said in Moscow that as if they would bring Donbass protection, they brought death. and this is the only thing they can do. We are grateful to everyone who tries to promote diplomacy, but Russia is the one who is throwing peaceful proposals. All peaceful proposals are American, by the way, Chinese, European, Brazilian, African, and Indian. No matter who says that the war should be stopped, Putin does not listen. It is Putin who says openly to the whole world what cities he threatens and what people seem to not exist. It is necessary to react to everyone in the world to make a decision. We, on our part in Ukraine, have made a number of new decisions, taking into account the honesty of Russian killers who claim that they are not going to stop. The fact that Putin inadequately perceives the objective reality or is based on false reports is a fact. I talked about this in yesterday's video, bringing objective data clearly indicating that the right of the Russian dictator absolutely does not correspond to the real situation of the case. Tonight, we will also talk about the economy, the results of the IMF, and you will see that even Putin's officials do not agree with the estimates of their master and believe that the economic situation in Russia is quite bad. But Vladimir Zelensky is right. It does not matter what motives Putin has. And in what abstraction his bloody mind is located, it is important that he clearly declares his goal to kill Ukrainians and destroy Ukraine. As for the new decisions, the decisions of Ukraine, some of which are actively complained by Russian Zetniks, and well, it is very strong. For example, this is what the channel of the Witnesses of Bayraktar, whose post was actively spread across all the channels, writes unpleasant news from the front. After the appointment of Madyar to the commanding forces of the unmanned systems, they began hunting for our birds, according to my experience. I will say that now they have weakened the pressure on the logistics and all the forces have been thrown to find out the destruction of our BPAs when they calculate the nests. They use all the means of suppression, do not buy and send chimera, they pay special attention. The optofiber we need to strengthen the camouflage and more often change the position. But of course it is necessary to intensify the work on the birds of the enemy and ask for a rocket or FAP for their defeat. It is almost impossible to complain about this channel, confirms the successes of the Hungarians and Zetnik Andrei Medvedev. Yes, hunting for our pilots is a direct consequence of the appointment of Robert Madyar Brody to the position of the commander of the BPA troops in the Soviet Union. There can be no other explanations. As a person who created the BPA units in Ukraine and fought since 2022, the Hungarians definitely understand what needs to be done to weaken this link with us. The Hungarians now have enough power to attract additional funds and arrange a hunt for our calculations. If pilots are hit by HIMARS and do not regret ammunition, this is a proof that the enemy is set for serious and consistent actions. Madyar is a dangerous, ideological, and professional enemy. We have created the BPA troops. But there is a nuance, Medvedev complains. We usually have a lot of time between acceptance and realization of the decision, and now there is no time to swing. Moreover, he makes a decision about what it is like to be a BPA soldier. It is impossible without discussing the task with the pilots and the drone manufacturers. Because no one is better than them, does not know how it should be and how it will be right. But first of all, it is necessary to intensify the destruction of enemy calculations. BPA asks for bears, Andrei bears. Well, for sure they will hear him. This is always how it works. Consequences, complain the Russian government hears them very, very much in general. Yes, I spent a lot of time talking about the Madyar and about the line of drones that are planned to be made by the armed forces of Ukraine. What is the main idea? That is, to make a kill zone throughout the entire front with fixed drones in specific positions that will not, like a fire brigade, drive from one point of the Russian breakthrough to another, but which will stand on their positions, know the terrain, and kill the Russians. The plan of Madyar is very simple, to kill many Russians. Specifically 35,000 Russians a month, and its simplicity is brilliant, and the implementation of this plan will really allow to leave the Russian offensive and take the Russian army. Because everything that Russia relies on is meat, just meat, 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 meat. Not on equipment, not on skills, not on professionalism, not on military ideas, on meat, on endless waves of meat. We see this in this current Russian offensive. Everything in the Sumy region, there is no Russian military equipment at all. Well, that is, there are only infantry attacks, just a large number of people who are recruited on the streets of Russia, who are gussified on the streets of Russia, migrants who are driven to the violence. All this Russia simply takes and sends to battle, not with shovels, of course, but without any serious training. This is the idea of Russia. This idea can be stopped only by destroying all this, and in fact, the Hungarian has about a week on the post of head of the forces of the unmanned systems, but he understands very well what he is doing. He understands very well what tasks. Many Ukrainian military wrote that the destruction of the calculations of the Russian BPA is the main task right here and now in order to achieve the desired effect. And we see, judging by Russian statements, that this is already happening. Russia will not be able to break through. The Russian army, which is conducting an aggressive war against Ukraine, is not able to make serious breakthroughs in the east of the country. However, it will continue ground offensive and airstrikes, which are more and more directed at civilian infrastructure. This is reported by the Estonian intelligence, as the censor of the Russian Federation says, and a reference to the RRR. This was stated by the commander commander of the intelligence center of the Defense Force of Estonia, Colonel Ans Kivisilk. According to him, the summer offensive of Russia, which has been going on for 2 months, mainly in the east of Ukraine, in fact, it got stuck in the persistent Ukrainian defense and turned to combat actions of a tactical level where the Russian troops are trying to move forward despite heavy losses. Kivisilk noted that the intensity of the attacks of the Russian troops this week remained at the same level every day. It recorded 150-160 attacks, which is not quite true. There were more of them, but not so much that it was a critical difference judging by the shelling. It can be said that the main efforts of Russia are concentrated in the Pokrovsk region. Half of all combat clashes take place there, said the Estonian colonel. Commenting on the success of the Russian troops during the invasion of the Sumy region and the border with the Kursk region, the head of reconnaissance in Varanasi 100 noted that despite the initial achievements and constant attempts, the Russian advance there was significantly stopped. The Ukrainians themselves commented on this, stating that they were not well prepared enough and did not have defensive structures in that region, which they have already corrected. As for the further actions, the assessment remains the same. Despite the unchanged strategic goals and plans, Russia is not capable of a breakthrough on not one part of the front, and the Ukrainian armed forces are able to contain the pressure that Kivisilk underwent. In principle, for those of you who watch my reports regularly, there is not much new information. This is exactly what we have been observing for 2 months, but I know that there are people for whom the opinion of a symbol blogger is not important, based on facts, and even if I bring in an infinite number of arguments and data of objective control. As you can see, the intelligence of Estonia on the same data, as well as using information that I definitely cannot access, come to the same conclusions. This does not mean that this conclusion is correct. But if different sources come to them independently, then this greatly increases the probability that the conclusions correspond to the reality. Nevertheless, this is not a reason to relax, exactly the opposite. Before the breakthrough on Avdiivka, the Russian army resolutely threw itself into Ukrainian defense for half a year. I remember even an article by the well-known Yuliana Ryabka, who adores to swing on emotional swings from defeat to victory, that the Russian offensive failed. A week or two later, Avdiivka operation started. The war is a dynamic thing. If you give weakness, you will get a catastrophe. So yes, at the moment it is not possible for Russia to break through the Ukrainian front, but everything can change. And the main thing is that the defense forces of Ukraine put the maximum effort, especially at the operational level, to stop the Russian advance. But as you have seen above, the new priorities of the SBI as well as the drone line work and give an effect. The effect is quite serious. Russia, once again, has been conducting its offensive for 2 months. It spends its resources, colossal resources, but could not achieve anything reasonable. And here we are just going to you to the Sumy region and the past week. This is one of the important directions. It is mentioned by Vladimir Putin as an example of success, which he is not. In principle, exactly what I described above, we have observed the whole past week in the Sumy region, where the US was able to relatively stabilize the situation. Relatively, because so far there is no full stop of the Russian offensive, but there are good successes. Let's start with the Russian advancements. In the Sumy region, the Minoborn RF last week reported on the capture of Yablanovka and Novoniklivka. Also, the US RF advanced from Vinikovka to the key route of Kursk-Suma and knocked out the Ukrainian military from the repeatedly taken name of the Kursk village of Gaivo. However, all this is needed in additional confirmation of the data of objective control. For now, we write with a pencil. Forces of defense of Ukraine, in turn, as a result of a counterattack, defeated Andriivka and Sumchina, 5 kilometers from the state border. The Ukrainian side reports on some stabilization of the situation in the Sumy border, and a video of strikes on Russian assault groups is published. The information about Ukrainian counterattacks and strengthening of defense is also confirmed by the Russian side. Also, a video of a burned equipment of the Russian armed forces on the border territory is published. At the same time, the deep state criticizes the state of fortifications in the direction, and we also discussed this a lot with you this week. What really is the evidence that the fortifications in the Sumy direction were done, let's say, badly, and somewhere were not done at all? This is a big problem, a problem that we face at least for the second time. In general, what is happening in the Sumy region is similar to what is happening in the Kharkov region. The Russians also flew there, were able to move about 5-7 kilometers, and then were stopped. And when there was a disassembly of the flights, it became obvious that they were simply not ready to reinforce in this direction. Why they were not ready, it is not clear. For a long time, these pyramids of the dragon's teeth were lying there for weeks. They were simply not used, they were not laid out. The same thing was found in Sumy. The same beep pyramids in Unikovka are simply lying idle. This is not clear. More precisely, it is clear, well, what is called, it is needed in some additional solutions and actions. I will remind you that in this war, in my opinion, there is no country that wins. Both sides lose in different ways. And for the most part, the problems of both sides are related to their own solutions inside. And of course, there are problems in the Ukrainian army. There are serious problems that need to be solved. They need to be solved, they work, and they work quite actively. The reforms, I hope, will continue, but nevertheless, we need to pay attention to these problems. You know, I'm always funny, I'm very easy to determine. Well, I, like any other person, follow some criticism of myself, some discontent, and so on, but only constructive. How do I differ? So if a person criticizes me or something, writes something, and in the end constantly says that the Ukrainian army is winning and moving forward, I'm like, well, everything is clear. The person did not watch my videos because there is not a single scandal, not a single problem in the Ukrainian troops, which I would not highlight. However, well, I don't know about the state myself, but I, accordingly, monitor all the Ukrainian military. And sometimes, personally, Zelensky is even more cunning than in Russia. Even in peacetime, one could be cunning, what is called his leadership. Therefore, the Ukrainian military is quite frank. They write quite frankly. There is the same Budusov with the censor. No, there is Bunyatov. Well, an infinite number of people who, to be honest, include the deep state, who absolutely frankly criticize and all that. Well, criticism is half of the matter. It is important that they react correctly to it and in fact solve the problem. And in Ukraine this is. Indeed, when this story appeared with the fact that one of the brigades was mocked at by soldiers, in one of the Ukrainian brigades there was a whole investigation and in fact many were punished. This is normal, this is how it should be. The power of Ukraine is not in the fact that it is flawless, the power of Ukraine is in the fact that it can become better. I mean the military aspect, because I do not touch politics at all. I do not understand this, and I am not interested in this. I am interested in the victims of aggression to be able to defeat the aggressor, to be able to survive, to stand up, and in fact, to achieve a fair world. This, in my opinion, should be the priority of the entire world community, which includes not only separate leaders and presidents, but also ordinary people. We should also be on the side of those who were attacked. We should be on the side of those who want to destroy. On the side of those who, in fact, the Russian occupation army wants to wipe out. We must help everyone we can, those who are the victims. And so, of course, fixing all these situations is an important story, and it is. Very important that Ukraine is improving, taking into account the mistakes. The other thing is that many Ukrainian military and volunteers, such as Sergei Sternenko, urge to do it more quickly. And I understand them, because the presence of these problems and the absence of their solution is life. This is not just a question of logic. Every mistake, every delay is killed by the heroes of the Ukrainian army, killed by Ukrainian civilians who are deprived of their lives because Russia kills them. So it is important to act quickly, correctly, and correct mistakes. I am very glad that in the Ukrainian army this really happens often. Although sometimes slower than I would like. This is why I say all this, that this story with the fortifications in the Sumy region is a little amazing, because after the Kharkov region, especially when they punished everyone or some part of the people who had this attitude, it seemed that this story could not be repeated, but it was repeated, and this is an important call. Nevertheless, in the Sumy direction, thanks to the heroism of Ukrainian soldiers, there is still active resistance, successful resistance. There is relative stabilization in the Sumy direction, and Ukrainian soldiers continue to capture Russian soldiers.
Подтверждает, точнее, Юрий Бутусов. Собственно, там видео есть, но я... YouTube очень плохо реагирует на видео с пленением людей.
Drone operator, Russian Z channels started to write that there were military crimes on the scene and the soldiers were shot. It is not clear why they made such a conclusion. There are both killed soldiers during the fight and prisoners. There are no traces of military crimes. Z channels spread the second video, which has the same events, where Russian soldiers lie on their stomach with their hands behind their heads. Apparently they assumed that they were shot, but nothing indicates this. Moreover, it is difficult to keep your hands behind your head when you are shot, so this is some kind of scam. But the fact remains that the Ukrainian military captured 12 soldiers of the Russian occupation army. In the Kupyansk direction, the Russian armed forces is trying to expand its framework. In the north of Kupyansk, in particular, they are fighting for Kondrativka, which is considered by the Ukrainian military observer Konstantin Mashevez to be the key settlement on this site. From the Russian side, he publishes a report about the attack in the Kondrativka region, and from the Ukrainian side, he warns about the danger of strikes on the logistics of the Soviet Union between Volchansk and Kupyansk. In the Pokrovsk direction, there are bloody battles. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported on the capture of Malinovka and Kuptivo to the east of Myrnograd. Shevchenko 1 was captured there and a pocket in the region of Elizaveta was destroyed. At the same time, according to Russian estimates, Ukrainian troops imposed bloody battles to the southwest of Konstantinovka in the area of Alexander Kalinovka and Yablanovka. In particular, a large-scale mechanized assault of the Russian armed forces in the composition of up to 24 units of equipment was reflected in the eastern Myrnograd. The Ukrainian 36th BRMP published a detailed video of the assault declaring the destruction of 14 units of equipment. However, the Russian military managed to get to Yablanovka for 2 km. Also on satellite images, it is clear that the Russian armed forces carried out at least 950 strikes against the bombings planned for 20 days at the site between Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka. On the western flank, the Russian armed forces carried out flogging in Orkovo and broke through the western part of Dachi. The Russian Defense Ministry also declared the capture of Nikolaevka. As far as it is true, it is difficult to say for now. At the same time, the Ukrainian defense forces successfully counterattacked in the area of Kalirovka and Orkovo. A separate group of Russian stormtroopers continues to sink into the Pokrovsk region. However, in the deep state, it is positive to assess the state of fortification in the region on the border with the Donetsk region. The copper effect on which Russia was counting on from these very operations in the Pokrovsk region has not been achieved. Everyone absolutely shits? Well, in the sense that there is no panic about the fact that, oh no, they have reached the Pokrovsk region. Because there are no military purposes behind this, there are fields up to the deforestation, and there can be no offensive on the Dnieper, in principle. And in the Donetsk direction, in the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, they declared the liberation of Kamara. However, the consequences of the fights in this settlement have still continued, and with the use of a tank from the Ukrainian side. That is, the fights were not in the sense that they were just shelled by Russian soldiers, but directly entered. The Russian military is moving both in the settlement and near it. Also, the Russian armed forces were moving between Kamar and Atred to the village of Zaporozhye near the administrative border of the Pokrovsk region and practically took it under control. Konstantin Mashevitz predicts that the Ukrainian defense forces will not be able to hold the border of Alexei-Kamek. As a result of everything that happened in the past week on the front line, what can be said? As you can see, the main trend of the past week is that the Soviet Union is actively counterattacking, stabilizing the situation on different fronts. The Russian offensive is far from being completed, but the Ukrainian defense forces are doing everything possible to stop it, causing the Russians great losses. At the same time, the Ukrainian fighters are adapting to a complete lack of Russian equipment and exclusively infantry assault. We hope that the trend for stabilizing the front will only intensify in the coming week, and the Russian armed forces will not be able to achieve any significant results, as the Estonian intelligence predicts. Under the occupied Takmak, a composition of fuel is burning in the Zaporozhye Oblast. This is reported by mass media. The Russian freight train could have struck the Ukrainian defense forces on the railway section between the villages of Levadno and Malchansk, says the RBC of Ukraine, with a reference to the head of the Center for the Study of Occupation and to the advisor of the mayor of Mariupol, Petro Andrushenko. 11 stations with fuel were set on fire. The smoke was seen in 15-20 kilometers, the building notes. Astra checked the specified locations on the surfaces of NASA firms, which record temperature anomalies almost in online mode, and the fire was indeed recorded on the map. Earlier, Astra reported about another railway system with fuel that was attacked by the ISU on June 6 in the Zaporozhye region. This happened at the crossing of the Belmengoverkny Takmak station, a few kilometers from the village of Zarya. In addition to the cars of Zarzar, the train transported 19 cars of the platform from Volnovac to the annexed Crimea. So Ukraine continues to strike and buy Russian logistics, reducing the possibility of a Russian offensive. The deserter, who killed an emergency services officer while running, surrendered to the military police. Day after the escape, 34-year-old Yanis Bov returned to the unit on his own, after which he was handed over to the police officers, the sources of Astra reported. He said that all this time he was in 2 kilometers from the location of the unit in the forest. Earlier, Astra reported that the 34-year-old born in Karelia, Yanis Bov, took a position in the village of Donetska, Grivoransky district of the Belgrade region, while firing at the soldiers of the emergency services who were with him. For the end of the contract, Bov did not work anywhere officially and was sentenced to several times for theft, possession of transport without purpose of hijacking. In addition, he has many administrative punishments, including for minor hooligans and resistance when detained. And in fact, apparently now he will return to the army where probably he will continue to kill Russian soldiers. Well, probably the most unexpected news of yesterday, although there was, how to say it, a lot of news. Political prisoner Sergei Tikhanovsky came out, but our NIVA and all the others are free to report on this. This became possible thanks to a visit to the Minsk special representative of the U.S. President Donald Trump. Kit Kellogg, a former political prisoner, left Belarus, it is claimed in the press release. Kellogg's deputy John Cole confirmed this information. Thanks to the firm leadership of President Trump, 14 prisoners were released from Belarus today. Thanks to the government of Lithuania for cooperation and support, they remain a reliable friend and ally, he said. Let's stay as we are. Tikhanovsky, I remind you, was the match that set the protests in Belarus in 2020. He planned to move to the presidential elections. A very interesting story that many have probably forgotten now. His idea was that he was a blogger, in fact, and he was going around, well, as it were, about laborers and gave them the opportunity to say what they really think about what is happening in the country, about corruption, about problems, and so on. And they really talked about it. And that's how Sergei Tikhanovsky's YouTube channel was born. And after that, he wanted to vote for the post-president. He was rejected, and his wife, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, went to vote. And apparently, in order to simulate some kind of competition in the elections, Belarusian CIK, or whatever it's called, allowed Tikhanovskaya to vote. The same year, Tikhanovskaya was detained. On December 21st, the Belarusian court sentenced him to 18 years in prison according to articles about the organization of mass riots, the burning of social hostility, the obstacles in the work of the CIA, the organization of actions that rudely violate public order. What was the idea? That when Lukashenko allowed Tikhanovskaya, he thought, well, what can she do? Like the hostess, what is she there? We are not a threat. But Tikhanovskaya converted his support into the support of Svetlana. So he was arrested. But the consolidation around Tikhanovskaya only expanded. And a huge number of protests. You remember there were protests in Belarus at the time which, unfortunately, ended in some way or another. But not because there were bad protests or there were few people. There were a lot of people. An incredible number of people according to the standards of Belarus. They just filled Belarusian cities, and the protest was peaceful, and many people see this as their problem. I don't think so. I believe that the problem was in the presence of Russia nearby. Well, that is, at some point in Russia, I remember even how Svetlana Tikhanovskaya addressed with a letter with an appeal to Vladimir Putin and said, just do not interfere, please. We will be able to establish normal interaction with you and everything else. But Putin interfered. That is, Putin guaranteed Lukashenko both money and power support. And after that, Lukashenko began to just destroy people. Well, that is, to just put everyone in jail, arrest everyone. There was a collision with the police, arrests for being a symbol, just the fact that there may be something white, red, and white color on your balcony. This is what Belarus has become. And in fact, Tikhanovsky was in prison all this time. In prison, there are still a lot of political prisoners in Belarus, including Maria Kolesnikova. I don't want anyone to forget about this. A brave woman, an incredibly brave woman, is one of the leaders of the protests inside Belarus, who just fundamentally refused to leave the country, even when Lukashenko tried to throw her out of the country. To be honest, when I saw these shots, how Tikhanovsky returns, how they hug Svetlana, well, it's all very emotional, it's very clear. What parallels appear in the head with the Russian political movement, with the killed Alexei Navalny in prison? I am very happy for Svetlana, I am very happy for Sergei, and for all those relatives and relatives of political prisoners who were released by Lukashenko as part of a deal with the United States. But first, let's not forget that there are still a lot of political prisoners in Belarusian prisons, and secondly, there are also a huge number of them in Russian prisons. For example, Alexei Goranov, who has big health problems in Russian prisons, Anastasia Favorskaya, who is also in Russian prisons, all of them are not for real crimes, but for political reasons, like Sergei. Tikhanovsky, who did not violate any laws, no morals, no criminal codex. As for what happened, it's crazy joy, crazy happiness. I can't imagine how Svetlana and Sergei feel right now. It's just amazing. I hope I will never have to experience anything like it, but I'd like to talk about the meeting with Lukashenko because it's interesting. Lukashenko is not Putin, in the sense that Lukashenko, unlike Putin, is not a real politician. Lukashenko really came to power as an oppositionist in his time, as a fighter of corruption. He knows what politics is, he knows politics, he is not a KGB member, he is not the one who usurped power being put on top. This is a political animal, he feels, he knows where the wind blows and it doesn't make him better. This is a dictator who committed a huge number of crimes, political murders. I once had a whole cycle of murders, including political murder in Belarus a long time ago in the dawn of my blogger career. And this does not justify him in any way, but he is a politician, he is a real politician, he feels where the wind blows. And his meeting with Kellogg, of course, is something interesting. It is clear that the United States somehow considers Belarus as a window to opportunities. Moreover, Lukashenko is open to this. They talked for 6.5 hours in recognition of the Belarusian side. They talked very friendly. That is, Lukashenko will not cling and hold on to Putin. Lukashenko does not feel obligated to Putin, and Lukashenko is known for being able to sit on all the chairs at once. Yes, in 2020 he lay almost completely under Russia because his own power was hanging on his hair. The time has passed and Russia is now in a vulnerable position, and the wind blows in the wrong direction. That is, Lukashenko is not Putin. Lukashenko will not tell from the scene how good Russia is when all Russian economic actors tell how the economy is rapidly falling behind. That's why Lukashenko is ready to cooperate with the West as he did his whole life before 2020. That's why whatever happens between Lukashenko and Trump in a broad sense, it's especially noticeable that Kellogg went. Kellogg hates Russia. Kellogg considers Ukraine absolute. He is the only normal opposition that can be in this world right now. It is clear that Putin will now look at Belarus with caution, because Belarus is a strategically important territory for Russia, which Russia in turn uses for attack on Ukraine, used at the beginning of the invasion, used to launch missiles, used to train Russian soldiers, and which can become a destabilizing factor for Russia itself. Therefore, we will pay attention to this visit, to these conversations, to the fact that not all political prisoners have been released, but some of them, including the noticeable ones, and we will continue to see what kind of interesting track it is. Kellogg came up with, well, it is clear, not without the American administration, what they want from Belarus and what Belarus is ready for. And Michael Nacke was with you. It is probably appropriate to say live Belarus and the word of Ukraine here. And let all regimes, all peoples who are under the grip of dictatorships, be it Iran, Russia, or Belarus, be free and be able to exist normally and live without this constant bloody war for the interests of some old grandfathers. Be it Ayatollah Khamenei, Lukashenko, who doesn't really want to fight, or Vladimir Putin. Well, Michael Nacke was with you. See you soon. All the best. Bye.